שלום לכולם, תודה רבה לכל מי שמצטרף למפגש עם שלי סטקרל. שלי ידבר איתנו בהרצאה הזאת ב-50 הדקות הקרובות על כל נושא של החשיבות של פונקציית הסורסינג, של פונקציית מקורות הגיוס בארגון, על תחומי האחריות של הפונקציה הזאת ועל ההבדלים ועל הגבולות בין סורסינג לרקרוטינג. למי שלא מכיר את שלי גם הרצה בכנס הגיוס לפני שנה אצלנו. הוא הגיע באופן אישי. קודם כל זה כבוד גדול לארח אותו. שלי הוא בעצם גורו הגיוס המוביל בכל נושא של פיתוח מקורות גיוס חדשניים בארצות הברית. בשנים האחרונות שלי הוביל מספר פעמים את כנס הסורסקון, שזה כנס מקורות הגיוס הגדול ביותר. ומבחינת הניסיון שלי נמצא בעולמות הגיוס מ-96, כשבשנים האחרונות הוא בעצם מייעץ ומלווה את הארגונים המובילים בעולם. בין השאר הוא עבד עם מייקרוסופט, עם גוגל, עם מוטורולה, קוקה קולה ועוד ארגונים על נושא של בניית פונקציית הגיוס, על נושא של הדרכות בתחום פיתוח מקורות גיוס חדשניים והכשרת צוותים בכל העולם.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So, thank you for the introduction, Yakov. Today we are going to go over some building blocks of recruiting and sourcing. The objective is to give you a general understanding of how a sourcing team fits into a recruitment organization, whether it's an existing recruitment team or if you're building one, and whether you're using your own sourcing team or utilizing an external solution that provides that service. We'll review a little bit about both of those and different kinds of sourcing methods and how to manage a recruiter's desk with sourcing in mind. And finally, we will talk a little bit about the first step that involves both recruiter and sourcer, which is understanding the requirements. So with that, the first slide I would like to share is an overview. This overview is designed to be more of a roadmap. Anywhere in the organization of recruitment or the planning of recruitment that you start, you'll find that the objective is always to hire. That's where we end up. If we were to split this up into 3 different levels, we would have on the top what would be considered a strategic level above this line that I'm drawing here. In the middle, we would have probably more of a tactical, and at the bottom we would have operational. So if this is strategic, this is tactical, and this is operational, we would also be able to divide it vertically, and on one side we would have direct activities, on the other we would have indirect activities. But regardless of all this, we can follow the process in any direction, whether we start from strategic and move into attraction, or we start from any one of the other parts or components and move into the other one. We always end up with the same objective, which is to make a hire. So what this roadmap does is helps put together the entire recruitment and sourcing process into one cycle. If you look at the strategic side, both direct and indirect activities, in other words, the indirect activity of gathering all of the things that we need in order to understand the requirements, to understand what it is that we're looking for. That is a strategic component. What are we looking for? Do we build it? Do we buy it? Where do we get it? Should we get it? Should we rent it? Etc. On the direct side, we have the direct impact of that, which is intelligence gathering. That's finding out where the talent pool is, who they are, how much they make, what kind of decisions they make, how do we attract them, how do we approach them. Those are both strategic. But in each direction we go, indirect or direct, we end up moving on to the next phase. From here, we go to either find or attract. Now, in these 2 different opposites, although both of them are tactical, meaning that these are both the day-to-day, how do we go about finding people, how do we go about reaching out to them, we might be indirectly attracting them In other words, they come to us. This could be through traditional advertising. This could be through sometimes recruitment marketing or social media initiatives. In any case, this is also in marketing known as the push. We're advertising, we're telling people about this opportunity, about the company. On the opposite end, we are still in tactical mode, but now we're looking more at attracting people directly or one-on-one, which is where we go and find them through internet sourcing or telephone sourcing. And this is typically what is referred to as sourcing. That doesn't mean that recruiters don't source. Recruiters, of course, could be on both the indirect and the direct side. And likewise, it doesn't mean that sourcers don't do any recruiting. Sourcers may be focusing on internet research, but occasionally do some advertising, just like recruiters may be focused on marketing, but occasionally do some internet sourcing, and conversely. Regardless of which direction we're going, if we're coming this way and going down that path, or if we're coming this way and going down that path, we always end up at the same place, which is we have to, at some point, speak with the candidates. Why are we going to speak with the candidates? Because now we're going to convert them. We're either going to convert people that came to us, they responded to an advertising, in which case the indirect activity of candidate conversion falls on this side, and that's where they're calling you. You answer the phone, and they ask about an opportunity, and you go through your screening process. On the other side, we have the direct activity, which is where we call them. They're not expecting a call, and typically, again, this is what sourcers are usually known for, and that's calling passive candidates and converting them and becoming, convincing them, if you will, to look at the opportunity. That is called engagement on either side. So anywhere we look in this process, it is circular, and we do have two sides, indirect and direct, and we have strategic, tactical, and operational. Sourcing is generally understood as the process of intelligence gathering, internet research, telephone research, and converting suspects that are possible or potentially candidates. In other words, they're not candidates yet, but they may be. Sometimes we can stretch the definition of sourcing to the initial engagement, where we're reaching out to passive candidates, and that is still considered sometimes aspects of sourcing. So traditionally, when companies talk about sourcing activity, what they really mean is the direct side of this equation, with perhaps a little bit of the engagement side. However, sourcing really encompasses all of it, just as recruiting encompasses all of it. If we were to specialize the function, then the specialty on the right would be one specialty and the one on the left would be another. If we were to specialize it further, we can actually specialize it into quadrants. So one specialization would be intelligence gathering and internet sourcing. Another one would be telephone sourcing and converting suspects. Yet a third specialization would be inbound calls and advertising. And the fourth one would be the recruitment marketing or advertising and employment branding on a higher scale, as well as the requirements gathering. So this would be more of the role of a corporate HR or a recruitment account manager or something like that. So if you had two specialties, they would be left and right. If you had four, they would be in each of the corners. And that's why we have this map.
One question.
Go ahead. Yep.
You know, from your experience, what you see in companies in the US, I mean, do you have a recommendation whether for different people doing either intelligence gathering and internet sourcing and other people doing the telephone sourcing and convert the suspects, or is it someone will do all the process from the intelligence gathering until the converting the suspects?
It's a matter of scale and whether your primary driver is to reduce cost or increase quality or increase the speed of response or the time to hire. So each one of those priorities has a different approach. If your interest strictly in reducing cost, and that's the most important driver, then often you find that some of this process is better done outsourced. typically in that case, you could outsource the bottom part of it, the operational, which is converting respondents and converting suspects. This is often referred to as a call center. So if cost was your number one concern, you would outsource the operational component. If speed is your number one concern and you want to do it much faster, you could outsource the middle component, or you could focus on outsourcing just this half over here. In other words, you could outsource the internet sourcing and telephone sourcing to a company that can do it very quickly and increase quality and speed at the same time. If you wanted to increase quality and cost was not an objection, or cost was not an issue, in other words, you have budget and you don't have to reduce cost, then you can do everything in-house. But when you do everything in-house, that means you have to learn how to do all of these 8 different things, and sometimes you'll need to invest in different people. If you want to do it in-house, you could have 4 different roles. One job title would be the top left, one job title would be the bottom left, another job title the top right, and another job title the bottom right, but there may not be one person in each. For example, you could have one individual in charge of the strategic components of requirement gathering and marketing, and you can have several individuals in charge of converting respondents and suspects, and several individuals conducting internet sourcing and telephone sourcing. It all depends on the scale. If you have 100 or 200 or 300 hires, you could probably have a small team. If you only have to do 30 hires, then you really only want to have 1 or 2 people. Again, just depending on the volume. Also the level of difficulty. But if you had lots of openings and a robust budget because you had a lot of hiring to do, then yes, you might have 4 different roles and a number of people in each of those roles. If you have a very tight budget and you can outsource, then you might have 1 or 2 people internally, perhaps on this side, in-house or at your organization, and then the rest of it would be outsourced, which is on this side. That's another way to do it. The one thing you can never, ever outsource is the requirements gathering, which is the most critical component. So briefly, when we talk about defining, we're really looking at why do we need to hire, what do we need to hire, and start preparing for the process of hiring. This has to do with tying reality with managing expectations. Hiring managers sometimes have the belief that they can push a button and somebody will magically appear that has all the skills that they want, and that's just simply not the case. They don't realize how much work is involved in finding, recruiting, screening, making an offer, and all those other things. So part of the definition is also management of expectation. In identification, this is where we usually, or the find phase, this is where we usually talk about sourcing in the form of internet search. This could be searching via search engines or buying access to databases. But the goal here is to find someone who potentially, based on their job title or where they work, is a possible fit. You don't know if they are until you talk to them, but you've identified they could potentially be. It's like prospecting. Then you have the attraction side, which is the opposite of the finding side. In attraction, the candidate comes to the recruiter. In identification, the recruiter goes to the candidate. Either way, we do use attraction as a way to establish rapport and sometimes even build our employment brand. Engagement is where we now have a conversation. You're talking to them, whether they came to you or you went to them. You're now having a conversation via the phone, via email, via social media, via face-to-face. In this case, we are now really doing the business of identifying if they are genuinely qualified and genuinely interested, if we remain interested in them. Typically, sourcing stops at this point and hands the relationship over to an in-house recruiter. And the recruiter then brings the person in for the interview and all the other internal processes. If the company does not have an internal recruiter, the sourcer may present the candidate directly to a hiring manager, in which case, again, the handoff is there and the candidate is now in the hands of the hiring manager if there is no in-house recruiter. Both the sourcer and the recruiter work together, and they're two specializations within one common process. That means that both of them, the sourcer and the recruiter, should have access to the person who is in charge of making a decision about who will be hired, the hiring manager, the hiring authority. Not HR, not the recruiter, but the actual boss of the person that's going to be hired. The reason for that is the sourcer asks questions about research that the recruiter doesn't usually ask. They don't know to ask, or they don't have time to ask. The focus for the sourcer is on research. The focus for the recruiter is on closing the candidate and filling the job. So the sourcer builds the pipeline, and the recruiter works the pipeline into the process and into the hire. They are both a part of the same process, but the sourcer's focus is on the skill and technical ability or professional ability of the candidate, and the recruiter's focus is on the fit for the organization, suitability for this particular position, more so than on do they have the minimum requirements. Recruiters typically get involved only once the minimum requirements have been established and the candidate already has proven that they met them. In a traditional recruitment environment, recruiting is limited to what we call the inbox. The inbox is your email, or it used to be your filing cabinet. People coming to you. You're the recruiter, they send you a resume, hey, I'm interested in the job. Then with the advent of technology, we brought on what are called applicant tracking systems or customer management or relationship management systems. This is in-house databases or proprietary databases the company owns where they store all of the resumes that come through their inbox. The talent pool then becomes bigger because we go from the hundreds of thousands of emails in your inbox to the millions, perhaps, of items that your company has gathered into their database historically. We then expand once again into job boards. Now we're looking at resume databases, and we can grow that talent pool even more. But typically, this is the end of recruitment as we know it today. Most of the time, recruiters are not getting involved with online social networks. They're not doing search engine searches, and they're certainly not utilizing advanced deep web techniques. As you can imagine, the size of the talent pool gets bigger and bigger the deeper you go into the web, and so you have access to more candidates. But at the same time that the size of the talent pool increases, so does the amount of time that you have to spend. It's very quick to do something in your inbox. It's a little bit slower, but still fairly quick to do something in your ATS and on a job board. But social networks take time, search engines take time, and deep web takes quite a bit of time. In fact, it also takes extensive technical knowledge and a very large degree of effort. So, while we have access to the biggest population of candidates when we search the deep web, it's also the most difficult and the most time-consuming. The happy space for your company or your hiring manager would be somewhere in the middle where they are satisfied that they're getting sufficient response from internal and external sources. That could be a combination of everything from inbox to job boards, or it could be a combination of ATS to social networks, or it could be social networks to search engines, or deep web, etc. So each mix is going to be different. Just keep in mind that as you grow the talent pool, the size of available candidates, you are going to also grow the amount of time and effort. Throughout my consulting experience, all of the different companies that I've worked with, well over 200 companies that I've built sourcing teams for, or with as an internal employee or as a external advisor, fall under two very distinctive types of recruitment, reactive and proactive. Within the reactive, I've seen many companies have two or more different models within their organization. A company, an employer, might have both defensive and responsive recruiters. They might have both defensive and anticipative recruiters. So let me break down what these different modes or modalities of recruitment organizations are. The defensive reactive recruitment organization is mainstream, the general population, if you will. Most companies operate in the defensive mode. That's dealing with inbound respondents, people that are sending resumes and applying through a website, and maybe sometimes events like career conferences or simply conferences, and sometimes employee referral programs that are part of the company, and for example, a reward for referring an employee, to refer someone else that becomes an employee, and they then get some sort of bonus. That is typically defensive. They are waiting, that recruiter or that recruitment team is waiting until something happens before they take action. With the responsive reactive, they're a little bit more proactive, and some companies will have a large percentage of their recruitment defensive, and they'll have a handful of recruiters that are responsive. Both are reactive, but the responsive recruiters do a little bit more specialized job posting in particular marketplaces that are rare or niche. They might do some non-traditional advertising. They might do some viral marketing, or might use LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and so on. And some companies also have a handful of anticipative or pipeline building recruiters. These are recruiters that get involved with hiring managers before a job is open, and they start building a database of potential candidates in advance of the requirement. So they might already have a Rolodex or a card catalog or a database of potentially interesting people that they haven't approached yet, but that they have communicated or conversed with, so that when the right opportunity comes around, they can very quickly engage. And so in this way, they are anticipating the demand. Here is where we find a very high grade level of corporate recruiter that acts almost as a business partner and may even be building talent communities on their own in advance of any requirements being posted. Finally, we have the proactive model. And again, there are organizations that might have both responsive reactive and proactive, for example, or defensive reactive and proactive recruitment efforts. The proactive one is more where the recruiter is utilizing sourcing techniques to build a large database of leads, and they're not necessarily conversing with those candidates or building a community. They're simply just finding everybody that they can find and building a database. Maybe they're putting them into their applicant tracking system or their customer management or CRM system. A lot of times proactive recruitment efforts revolve around non-employee referrals. That's sometimes also referred to as networking. Now you're asking people that are not employees to refer other people they know might be interested. You might also use the applicant tracking system as a source and look for people that were second or third place qualified for another position that was similar, and those people may be number one most qualified for this position because it's slightly different and a better role for that particular person's background. In this case, that is a proactive activity as well. So once we've understood where the sourcing team falls in the organization, let me help define what benefits a sourcing team can bring. Cost reduction is one of the benefits, although it's not always the most important, and in some cases cost reduction is not important at all, because if your company is suffering and maybe on the verge of demise because you can't find the right people, then really cost is not an object. In other words, you might need to spend the money to find those people and bring them on, or else your company will not survive. So cost isn't the only one, but cost is certainly a big one. Sourcing, because of any specialization that you apply into a business process, usually specialization brings with it reduction in cost. And so the same thing applies for sourcing. Sourcers can help you reduce your hiring costs by doing some of the more costly or more time-consuming and effort required activities much faster because of the specialization. But sourcing can also pre-fill pipelines ahead of demand. So it can be an activity that supports the anticipative recruitment model. And that is bringing candidates into the fold that might be potentially of interest in the future, therefore increasing the speed when the position becomes available. We already have a number of people that we've been speaking with, And instead of having to go out and find them, talk to them, screen them, bring them in, we are already at that step where we simply bring them in, which, as you can see, would reduce part of the time involved in the process. Also, sourcers are a good way to reach channels that are not reachable by recruiters because recruiters have too many other responsibilities as part of their regular duties. And, for example, they can't spend the time to learn how to do deep web searching or how to employ direct advertising and PPC. So, because of that, the sourcing specialist can sometimes do the things that the recruiter simply can't. Not from lack of ability, but from lack of resources, lack of time. A few other sourcing advantages include freeing up the recruiter's time to focus on the more business impactful activities. For example, the recruiter would spend less time finding people and more time qualifying them, so the hiring manager would spend less time qualifying them. The recruiter could spend more time focusing on communicating and convincing very good candidates to come into the organization instead of spending time hunting them. Direct sourcing, once we get into the deep web, is not just the deep web, but also asking people that you meet for people that they might know. Just like we ask our current employers if they know anyone that might be a good fit for this job, we're also asking people that we've just met online or through our sourcing process. That is the same as networking. It's basically soliciting non-employee referrals. Social networking is another example of direct sourcing. Mining resume databases, going into resume databases like Monster or Dice or LinkedIn or other things like that, and doing very specialized searches to uncover resumes that are not commonly available or are simply not available because they're not actively looking for a job. And then, of course, reaching out to them and getting them interested. Also, there might be research that you could buy, intelligence that you could buy, for example, spreadsheets or lists of names of people with phone numbers. That's another aspect of sourcing. What we have here on this slide is a list of sourcing channels that I think is a generally accepted menu for all of the different varieties of sourcing activities. This doesn't mean that your organization must do all of them. It simply means that here are a variety of different activities that are considered sourcing that you should consider employing or using, and just gives you a good idea as to what all they are. Of course, we have advertising, that's posting the job, and then we have searching the database where we post the jobs for resumes. Some databases like Monster and Career Builder and Dice allow you to find resumes. There's also finding resumes on search engines using Google and Bing and other search engines. We might also find resumes inside of our own applicant tracking system from people that applied to roles prior. We might do some non-traditional marketing in the form of search engine optimization or direct advertising or perhaps mobile marketing. We might do some deep web research. That's a very advanced form of search engine techniques. We might network online with professional associations or find people who attend or speak at conferences and at organizations. Corporate and university alumni, people that went to a particular school or worked at a particular company, often gathered together in communities. Leads databases. Diversity communities or affinity groups. These are groups of special interest people that get together. Sometimes they could be clubs, like a Java developers group or something like that. Online communities, it's a version of those groups, but on the internet, sometimes they have mailing lists or forums where they have discussions. We have social networks. You're familiar with LinkedIn, but also Facebook and Twitter and a few others are becoming more and more important. And then, of course, the blog side of social media, which is people who write on their website about their day-to-day activities, oftentimes leading us to clues about what they do and who else they work with. So these are all the different sourcing channels.
But what are the ratios between, if I'm looking about number of open requisitions, number of recruiters, and number of sorcerers?
Well, there really isn't one. It depends a lot on the level of difficulty and on the scope of the kind of recruiting that you're doing. If you're, for example, recruiting inside of just one country and within Israel, the complexity is not as large because it's once you've identified everybody that does a particular discipline in Israel, you kind of have reached the limit of the population. If you're doing that worldwide, you can imagine how that complexity is much larger, and you may not identify everyone by just using one source. And as far as how many people are invested in each one of these activities, first of all, I want to say that not every one of these activities should be conducted. So this is a menu, which means you could use items 1 and 7 and not necessarily the others. You could use items 2 and 3 and not necessarily the others. This might be 100 hires. Then this might be maybe 10 hires. This might be maybe another, sometimes 20 or 30, right? This might be another 10 if you also include employee referrals. So that's, 140 hires. This might be 5, and this might be 5, and this might be 5. So you're really only looking at 15 hires in this area here, compared to 20 here, and 100 here. However, these 5 hires that you found from the deep web couldn't have been found anywhere else. And not only that, the amount of impact they have on the business, for example, they are fundamental principles that are going to be inventing the next product or selling the next product or whatever. So you have to look at also how important that role is, not just what percentage of the hires it is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if I have a company that is hiring 100 people, how many recruiters do I need? How many sorcerers, or what is the ratio?
Well, because the recruiter is working on, let's say that a recruiter is required to make 100 hires in a year, one full year, okay, 1 year. Out of those 100 hires, at least 30 of them are going to come from activity that the business is currently engaged in. Advertising, marketing, their job boards, their job website on their careers site. So that really only leaves 70 positions that the recruiter needs to actively recruit for, because these other 30 are already being filled internally. Oftentimes, another 20 might be filled by employee referrals, which again, the recruiter is not necessarily involved with, so that now leaves us with 50. Okay? So now you have a recruiter that makes 100 hires a year, 50 of which need to be sourced. With the sourcer, on the other hand, you might be working on perhaps 25 hires a year, 25 of which need to be sourced. So a recruiter might be able to handle, let's say, 20 open requirements simultaneously and might be able to fill something in the vicinity. My apologies for that. I don't know what was going on there. So as you were saying, yeah, the recruiter might be able to fill 100 positions, but and at any given day they have 20 requirements on their desk. Mm-hmm. However, they're not making 20 offers every month, right? To make 100 placements, they're really only making, say, maybe 8 offers a month. So a recruiter might be filling 8 jobs every month or 2 jobs every week. The sourcer might be filling 1 job every week, but every one of those jobs they fill is much more work because they have to go through a lot more to find the candidate than the recruiter does for that, 30 or 50 of the jobs that are filled by traditional marketing, and the company's already spending a great amount of money on paying for advertising and job boards and all that. So the difference probably would be 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, if I had to say. If you have to absolutely have a ratio, I would do probably 1 to 2 at minimum, probably maybe 1 to 3. In other words, the ratio would be 1 sourcer to 3 recruiters. Maybe even 1 to 4, depending on how complex the interview process is. If the interview process is very complicated and the business does 7 levels of interview plus a background investigation and all that, then you might have more recruiters because the internal process is more time consuming. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that can vary, but I would say 1 to 3, generally speaking. It's not 1 to 1. It never would be. It would be maybe 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 on average, if not 1 to 4. Okay. So the difference between the two is that on the sourcing, typically a sourcer is more about the hunt. They're tenacious and are looking for ways to solve problems. You can't find somebody. The sourcer is the one that's going to keep trying until they solve that challenge. How do you find somebody? The recruiter, on the other hand, I'm not saying that recruiters are not problem solvers or that recruiters can't solve problems. I'm saying that the focus for the recruiter is on the business knowledge. It's on the diplomacy. It's on being a coach or a partner to the hiring manager. It's on managing the process and the expectations. The recruiter is usually the matchmaker and the business person, where the sourcer is usually the one that does a lot of poking around and spends a lot of time learning about new skills, new techniques. Usually they're more technologically adept or interested, if not. So again, not to say that sourcers do not have any business experience, and not to say that recruiters have no technology experience. Sourcers would prefer or are more driven by technology than business knowledge, and recruiters are more driven by business knowledge than technology. You'll find a recruiter more interested in speaking with candidates and hiring managers than in learning a new browser or a new search engine. You'll find a sourcer more interested in a new search engine and less interested in speaking with candidates and hiring managers. Now, moving into another aspect of the process here, we have the intake meeting. This is the conversation that happens between the people who deliver the service, recruiters and sourcers together, and the people who are receiving or the recipients of that service, the hiring manager, if you will, the customer. This is the first part of that relationship and most important. Why should we have a meeting with the hiring manager? Why can't we just take the job order and start working? Well, because without that meeting, we sometimes miss out on pieces that are not formally written, but that are very important to the hiring manager. For example, the hiring manager may assume that you understand what they mean by a specific word, but that assumption is not explained in writing, and you make the wrong or incorrect assumption, not knowingly, and go off on a different direction. And this is where you end up submitting candidates to a hiring manager that says, that's not what I'm looking for. Why can't you find me what I'm asking for? If you've presented candidate after candidate and the hiring manager has said no to all of them, what happened was you did not do an intake meeting, or you did not do a thorough or complete enough intake meeting. In other words, you didn't understand what the hiring manager wanted. You looked at the paper and assumed that you knew what was behind the paper. There's a few other reasons why, besides that clarification, which is very important. We should also conduct an intake meeting because it helps to position us as an authority. Your recruiter and sourcer become the recruitment authority, meaning that they're the ones that are the expert, that have the experience. And if we prepare for this meeting, we can then show up to a meeting with the hiring manager, demonstrating an immediate value, or coming to that meeting from a position of value rather than from a position of service, asking, how can I help you and what can I do for you? Instead of having a blank piece of paper and saying, what would you like, as if you're taking an order and you're a waiter or a waitress and the customer is telling you what they want for dinner. Instead, you're coming to that meeting and you're suggesting, here are some activities that have led to good hires like this in the past. Here are some job titles and companies, etc. So bringing that value, in order to do that, we must have the intake meeting. We also have a really good opportunity to manage expectations and set timelines when we can introduce this concept during the intake meeting. It's better to start with, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, here's how long it's going to take us, than it is to wait until it's taking you too long, you haven't gotten back to the hiring manager, and they're now complaining, coming to you saying, where are my hires? Now, you look like you haven't been doing anything, even though you might have been doing all these things, and may have also been doing them very well. It still looks to the hiring manager like you haven't done anything, because you have no results to show. So instead, now you can show we are in this step of the process, and it has consumed this much of our time. Before you show up to this meeting, what you must bring with you are some of the names of similar companies that hire similar talent. So this isn't necessarily the names of your competitors, because you may not have any competitors, or you might have competitors that are really not in the same space as you, so therefore they're not relevant competitors. What you want is the names of companies that hire the same kinds of people that you hire. You might be in two completely different industries, but both hire the same type of person. You also want to bring to the meeting a list of possible job titles that are similar to the one in the requirement. A very good example of this is a programmer or a software engineer, which can be a software developer, software architect, programmer, computer scientist, computer engineer, algorithm developer, etc. I mean, there's 100,000 different ways, and they all have very much the same thing in common, which is they write code for algorithms for computers. Okay, so different job titles, same job. So bring with you a list of job titles so that you can validate them during the meeting. You also want to look at the keywords that are in the requirements. These are skills-related keywords, must have, for example, languages or technology or other skill-related words like that, and then bring a list of other synonyms that are either directly related or closely related to that particular keyword. You might bring with you community websites or job boards or career sites that you know are of possible interest. You might also bring with you a list of organizations and associations, even certifications that you know are relevant to this industry, even if they're not directly relevant to this job, because what this is going to do is prompt the hiring manager, the customer, to start asking questions around, well, what made you think of that? And they might themselves come up with suggestions that they hadn't thought of before. If you bring them an association and they go, well, actually, that's not really relevant, but, you know, that reminds me of this other association. Now you have an association that you did not have before, which can easily become a source of candidates. I really like to bring other jobs that I have filled in the past, especially one or two resumes from those. So if I'm going to a hiring manager that I've worked with in the past, or in a division or department that I've worked with in the past, I'll bring with me sample resumes of people that were interviewed or hired from that department or in that kind of role as a way to start a conversation. Like, what do you think about this resume? What do you like or not like? It's easier to have a conversation with somebody about what they like or don't like if you're showing them something than it is to have them tell you what they like or don't like without having anything to refer to. In other words, instead of having them try to visualize it in their mind, you bring them an example, even if it's a bad example, and they can then start telling you what a good example looks like. After the meeting, we have some things that we want to walk away from. But let me give you a couple of tools that you could use to identify what you want to bring to the meeting. A good place to find companies is to use the Google related command. On Google, you can put in the name of a particular company, and more specifically the URL. For example, if you put in related amdocs.com, and Google will come back and give you a list of 100 or up to 200 other websites that have statistically similar content, meaning these are companies that are related to or in the same industry, possibly. Not all of them, but they're related. So here we have. So that's one example. Another example would be to use LinkedIn to identify other companies similar because of the types of people that they have in their network. For example, if we went to company search and did a search for Amdocs, if you pull up the company page, oftentimes on that company page, it will list other companies that are in similar industries based on the type of people that are on LinkedIn. For example, going to the insights here, see right down the bottom here it says people also viewed. So other people looked at these companies in conjunction with Amdocs, and you can go on more insights here or also click on insights up at the top, and this will give you some more competitive landscape kind of information about the company. For example, where people come from. They come from AT&T or Infosys or IBM or Accenture when they go to work at Amdocs meetings. Another good source of this kind of information is simply to use a list of companies on a simple Google search. So if we know that, for example, Amdocs and Infosys and Cognizant are related, we can do a search for Amdocs, Infosys, and Cognizant. Any web page that contains all three of those companies might likely have a list of other companies that are similar. Wipro, Infosys, etc. So sometimes this technique works very well and gives you a list of competitors that are in the same space, even though they're not listed as competitors on industry tracking. During the intake meeting, the reason that we put so much attention on keywords is because once we start searching, we might find that people are calling themselves something different than what the job title is for that company, or simply they refer to what they do with jargon or language that is not the same as the language that's in a job description. Then we simply go out and, as we did now, just verify that those people really exist. If we can't find anybody with that job title, then obviously that job title is not a real job title in the rest of the world. It might be a significant job title just for that company, but nobody else calls it that. So we need to change our search requirements and how we find those people. Otherwise, we're going to end up not finding anybody, since nobody else but your company calls it that. And then finally, we have what you want to leave that meeting with. So at the end of the meeting with the hiring manager, you want to have the following completely, as in you want to have this list of data when you leave that meeting. So come prepared to the meeting with the other stuff that we talked about, companies, job titles, etc., and leave the meeting with a profile of the ideal candidate, maybe even the resume of someone that did the job before, or someone that the hiring manager would like to hire but can't hire right now, can't afford, or they're currently working somewhere else and they're not leaving. So look at it as the profile of the perfect candidate. Okay, want to walk away with that. You also want to walk away with at least one, but even better if you have 2 or 3 qualification questions that you can very briefly ask on a 10-minute phone conversation that would put somebody in or out of the pipeline because of an absolute. For example, if you have ever experienced working in an oil field, then you're in. If you've never experienced working in an oil field, then you're out. Only people that have at least once in their life been to an oil field would even be qualified. So that's a knockout question. There's all kinds of knockout questions. Easiest way to get it is to ask the hiring manager what their knockout question is, because a lot of hiring managers, this is one of the first things that they ask. So why shouldn't you ask it before you even introduce the candidate to the hiring manager? That way you know that they're going to have a good answer, the right answer, or at least some version of the right answer, and you're not presenting somebody that's going to fail on that very first question. You want to leave this meeting with a list of keywords that you know have to absolutely be present on someone's profile, or else that person is never to be considered or completely eliminated from the process. This is the must-haves. This is not the nice-to-have. A final list of job titles after they've approved job titles and company names and similar companies. You present them the ones that you found and have them say yes or no to them, and you have a final list of which ones are actually going to be approved. And then you will also want to leave with a couple of keywords that would elevate a candidate to the top of the list. So if you can find somebody that has this, this, and this, not only are they qualified, but they're also the best possible, they're at the top of the list because of that. And finally, I always like to ask, what is this person that does this job going to need to have accomplished 1 year from now in order to get a good score in their annual review, in order to have been considered successful? Once I get back to my desk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my notes and put them into a one-page document. That one-page document is very simply an agreement that says, here was our notes from our meeting. You said you wanted someone with this and this skill set, and they could come from this or these companies or similar. They could have this or these job titles, and these are these keywords are the must-haves, etc. I put that into a very simple one-page document. Could be an email as well, and I send it to them along with maybe 1 or 2, maybe even 3 sample resumes. Not resumes of people that you already talked to that you're ready to hire, but resumes of people that look like they have the background, and you can pull these from any database that you already have. Again, these are not candidates, these are just sample resumes. You can remove the name. Why? Because, again, it's a quality conversation. You can have the conversation with the hiring manager now that says, you wanted me to go find A, B, C, and D. I found something that looks like A, B, C, and D. Do you agree with me that this looks like A, B, C, and D? And the hiring manager will say, no, I don't think it has B, or enough B, or too much C. Or maybe they'll say, yes, that's perfect, A, B, C, and D. And now you have a good place to start from. And this is something that I sent to the hiring manager within a day, a business day. So if we met on Tuesday, I'll do it on Wednesday, of our meeting. And really what I'm looking for is a reply, even via just a simple email that says, yes, that looks right, because now I have gotten them to agree that we're on the same page. And later on, they can't say, oh, but I wanted this and this, LMNOP, XYZ, and then you can say, well, according to our meeting, you said you wanted A, B, C, and D. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for LMNOP. Okay? So again, you don't have to do it, but it's a very, very good strategy for yourself. There's an example form that is attached here, which is my intake meeting form, and really just provided as a useful reference. And that's it.
Shally, thanks a lot for your presentation. It was very insightful, and as always, it was great pleasure having you with us. טוב, אני מקווה שככה הצלחתם לקחת כמה רעיונות וכיוונים, כמו שראינו מקודם. יותר ויותר ארגונים בונים ומשקיעים בפונקציה הזאת של תחום מקורות הגיוס, בהבנה שכדי להגיע למועמדים ייחודיים צריך לבנות את ערוצי הגיוס החדשניים. אז אני מקווה שההרצאה של שלי נתנה לכם כך כיווני חשיבה, בהחלט משהו של לקחת, לחשוב כחלק מהתוכניות לשנת 2013, איפה אתם רוצים להיות, איפה אתם רואים את התחרות שלכם, איפה אתם רואים את האתגרים שלכם באיתור המועמדים, על סמך התוכניות והאסטרטגיה של הארגון לשנה הקרובה ול5 השנים הקרובות. ככה רק בשביל לסכם ולראות איפה אנחנו יכולים לעזור, אנחנו ממשיכים בנושא של הכשרות ללינקדאין, גם הכשרות פנימיות וגם הכשרות חיצוניות, גם לאנשי גיוס משאבי אנוש שרוצים ללמוד לשלוט בכלים האלה, גם כאלה שמכירים את לינקדאין אבל לא מספיק התנסו, לא מרגישים בטוחים, רוצים ללמוד את כל הטריקים כדי להשתמש בו, וגם הדרכות למנהלים. אנחנו מגיעים לארגונים, מלמדים את המנהלים איך להשתמש בלינקדאין, וזו דרך מצוינת למנף את הנטוורקינג שלהם כדי לעזור לכם בגיוסים ולהרחיב את מקורות הגיוס של החבר מביא חבר. השנה, עכשיו, פעם ראשונה אנחנו פותחים סדנת לינקדאין למתקדמים. אתם תוכלו למצוא מידע נוסף ב-HRD COIL, אחרי הרבה זמן שמבקשים מאיתנו, אז באמת לקחנו את זה, ואנחנו בסדנה הזאת ניכנס לטריקים היותר מתוחכמים, לתהליכים היותר מעמיקים, כיצד להשתמש בלינקדאין ולהגיע למועמדים שעל ידי שימוש בחיפוש בוליאני, שימוש במנוע חיפוש של גוגל וכדומה. ודבר אחרון, אבל אחד השירותים הצומחים שלנו היום, אנחנו מבינים שלא תמיד לארגונים יש את הזמן להתעסק עם הנושא של החיפושים ברשת והעבודה הזאת של החיפוש של הדיפ ווב, כמו ששלי קרא לזה. לא תמיד יש את הזמן, לא תמיד יש את הידע. אז היום אנחנו עובדים עם ארגונים כדי להציע להם, לעשות בשבילם את האוטסורסינג הזה, לעזור לארגונים להגיע למועמדים שאין שום דרך אחרת להגיע אליהם מלבד פנייה אקטיבית, איתור וחיפוש אנשים שלא מחפשים עבודה, וכבר פיתחנו את המתודולוגיות שלנו איך לעשות את זה בצורה חכמה. בכל המקרים האלה אנחנו נשמח שתיצרו איתנו קשר דרך האתר של HRD COIL, או לשלוח אל האימייל ליעקב@HRD COIL. תודה רבה ולהתראות בהרצאה הבאה.